You know that sinking feeling when you realize the harder you try to be seen, the less they actually see you? It's like you're standing under a blinding spotlight, yet somehow invisible. Every effort to prove your worth, every desperate attempt to gain respect feels like throwing water into an endless desert. Because the painful truth, one that Machiavelli whispered centuries ago, is that genuine respect often begins precisely at the moment you disappear. In a world obsessed with visibility, there's a paradox that quietly governs the shadows of true power. Absence often commands deeper respect than presence. You've been taught that to matter, you must be loud, visible, constantly available. Your inbox, notifications, and calendar all scream your significance. Yet deep down, you feel like a prisoner to your own image, trapped in an exhausting loop of validation, with no real sovereignty over your identity. Machiavelli knew something crucial. True power rarely belongs to the endlessly available. He understood that visibility without strategic withdrawal creates vulnerability. Those who always say yes, who are always present, are seen not as powerful, but as useful. Valued perhaps, but never truly respected. Because respect in its purest form is born from mystery, distance, and the unsettling fear that comes when someone valuable suddenly withdraws their presence. It's then, and only then, that others realize your true worth. Yet beneath this calculated dance of absence lies something even deeper, something Carl Jung described as the shadow, the hidden self you refuse to acknowledge, the part of you that doesn't crave validation, but control. The shadow doesn't scream for attention, it silently orchestrates from the background, manipulating others precisely because you refuse to face its existence. Jung warned that the shadow gains power when denied. Ignored, it turns invisible strings into subtle chains. You're not just trying to be seen, you're running from the self you've abandoned. The hidden desperation behind your compulsive need to be visible masks a deeper fear, insignificance. You're terrified that if you vanish, even for a moment, you'll be forgotten. Yet this fear blinds you to a profound psychological truth. Disappearance doesn't erase your power, it amplifies it. The paradox that Machiavelli masterfully unraveled is that stepping back from the relentless pursuit of approval actually compels others to step forward, drawn by curiosity, fear, admiration, or a mixture of all three. Disappearing isn't merely a retreat, it's a provocative statement about your value. But here's the tension you must face. Is disappearance truly an act of liberation, freeing you from the exhausting chains of validation? Or is it just another subtle form of manipulation? This existential tension sits at the heart of Machiavelli's unsettling insight, forcing you to question your motives. Do you vanish to claim your freedom, or to pull others deeper into your orbit through their own projections and fears? As you ponder this disturbing paradox, you begin to sense the hidden mechanics of power. True influence doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't fight, it withdraws, creating a vacuum others rush to fill with their anxieties, hopes, and myths. And suddenly, you understand why the most influential figures throughout history are often those whose absence spoke louder than their words. This revelation is unsettling because it means you've misunderstood power all along. Your endless visibility wasn't making you stronger, it was making you vulnerable, predictable, easy to manipulate. Machiavelli wasn't teaching you deceit, he was revealing the subtle dance of psychological control. The dance you've unwittingly danced for years, always leading, always exhausted, but never truly respected. You begin to wonder now, what if respect isn't something you earn through constant availability, but something you command precisely when you dare to vanish? And in that unsettling silence, the hook sinks deeper. Respect begins the moment you disappear. The hidden weakness that fuels compulsive visibility. You've always thought your relentless visibility was proof of your strength. After all, the world admires the fearless, applauds the outspoken, and rewards the ones who never stop showing up. But behind your public persona lies an unsettling vulnerability, a silent terror of insignificance that compels you to endlessly expose yourself, emotionally and socially, in a futile attempt to affirm your worth. Every story you share, every achievement you broadcast, every moment you spend ensuring others notice your presence, it's all driven by an unconscious dread, the fear of becoming invisible, forgotten, disposable. This compulsive visibility isn't courage, it's an admission of weakness disguised as strength. The irony is tragic. The more desperately you demand recognition, the less substantial you appear. In your quest to be seen, you become predictable, readable, and manipulable. Your desire for validation becomes the very leash others use to control you. You've mistaken exposure for authenticity, confusing transparency with integrity, unaware that your endless openness is silently betraying you. Why do you feel this compulsive need to constantly be visible, to be validated, to ensure others never forget your worth? Carl Jung would tell you it's because beneath your carefully maintained exterior is an internal void, an existential emptiness you're too afraid to confront. Rather than facing this void, you seek external mirrors to reassure yourself that you exist, that you're meaningful. But each validation you receive fades quickly, leaving you hungrier than before. You chase affirmation because you're terrified that without it, you might discover you have no identity beyond the reflections of others. This invisible, unconscious contract you've signed with the world says, "See me clearly so I never have to face who I truly am." It's a bargain you've struck to avoid confronting your shadow, your hidden, suppressed self that holds your true power. And because you've refused to acknowledge this inner authority, you've unconsciously surrendered it to others, letting them define your worth, dictate your presence, and control your identity. The reality is harsh, but necessary. Your desperate need to be constantly seen is rooted in the unwillingness to truly see yourself. When you finally recognize this hidden weakness, this compulsive visibility driven by fear rather than courage, something shifts profoundly. Suddenly, you understand the futility of chasing approval from outside, of sacrificing your authentic self for temporary validation. You realize that true power doesn't come from begging others to notice your existence, but from the willingness to disappear and observe what remains. In that silence, free from compulsive visibility, your real strength begins to emerge, quiet, sovereign, unshakable. Before you confront this truth further, consider this a gentle invitation. If these words resonate, if you find clarity in this revelation of hidden fears, consider subscribing to this channel, liking this video, and becoming part of a community that values real introspection over surface validation. This isn't just another call to action, it's a call to consciousness, a subtle reminder that your visibility should always be your choice, not a compulsion driven by fear. Remember, the paradox you're uncovering here, the one Machiavelli understood deeply, is that true respect, genuine respect, begins exactly where compulsive visibility ends. The freedom you seek, the authority you crave, the validation you chase relentlessly, all await in the silent courage of stepping back. This revelation is unsettling but powerful. Your real influence grows not when you scream for attention, but when you dare to vanish, leaving others to face the undeniable reality of your worth. Because respect, as Machiavelli understood, begins precisely at the moment you disappear. Machiavelli understood a truth so unsettling that most spend their lives trying to deny it. Respect is not given to the accessible. We want to believe that by offering ourselves, our time, our attention, our constant availability, we secure the admiration and loyalty of others. But Machiavelli saw through this illusion. He recognized that what is always within reach is rarely valued. That which anyone can have at any time loses the aura that commands reverence. And yet, many exhaust themselves trying to earn respect through endless presence, blind to the fact that their availability is the very thing dissolving their authority. Why is this so? Because respect is born not from what people can easily touch, but from what they can't quite grasp. The inaccessible generates fascination. It invites projection, forces others to fill the gap of your absence with their own myths, fears, and desires. Distance creates a kind of sacred space around you, a space that compels others to stop and consider your worth. Machiavelli's brutal insight was not about playing cruel games. It was about mastering the dynamics of perception, understanding that power grows not in the noise of constant contact, but in the silence of what remains just out of reach. Consider how easily proximity breeds contempt. The leader who is always among the people, always explaining, always available for questioning, soon finds that his words lose weight. His presence becomes ordinary. What once might have commanded attention turns into background noise. The same is true in our personal lives. When you are always present, always responding, always offering, you teach others that they can have you whenever they wish. And what is always obtainable becomes invisible. Machiavelli's lesson strikes at the heart of our modern obsession with connection. We are taught that the more accessible we are, the stronger our relationships, the deeper our influence. But this is a dangerous lie. True authority requires you to be seen as rare. It demands that you dare to create space between yourself and the world, not out of arrogance, but out of understanding that mystery fuels power. When you withdraw, when you resist the urge to be endlessly available, you force others to reckon with your absence, and in doing so, you teach them to value your presence in ways that constant proximity never could. The illusion of proximity as power is seductive because it feels safe, it feels active. But in reality, it weakens you. The more you are seen, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier it is for others to manipulate, control, or dismiss you. Machiavelli challenges you to consider, what if your true strength lies not in being always present, but in being precisely where you choose to be, and absent where your silence speaks louder than any word? To reclaim respect, you must dare to step back. You must let go of the belief that visibility equals value. Instead, trust in the power of distance, in the authority that grows in the unseen. Machiavelli's brutal insight forces you to confront a truth most would rather ignore. Respect begins not with nearness, but with the courage to be missed. And as the silent ruler knows, it is in absence that your legend begins to form, and in that legend, your true power finally takes shape. We live in an age that worships transparency, where the highest virtue seems to be the ability to expose yourself fully, to speak every thought, to share every feeling, to lay bare your soul for the world to see. You've been taught that this is strength, that openness is authenticity, that honesty means never holding anything back. But what if this is the very trap that keeps you chained? What if moralized transparency, This cult of openness is nothing more than a disguised form of self-betrayal. Moral frameworks inherited from culture tell you that hiding is weakness, that mystery is deceit, that to guard your inner world is somehow dishonest. And so, you begin to reveal yourself endlessly, not because it empowers you, but because you fear the judgment that might come if you choose silence. What you call authenticity becomes a leash, binding your worth to public approval. Each confession, each act of openness feels like liberation at first, but soon you notice that you are no longer in control. The more you share, the more others feel entitled to pieces of you. Your transparency, once a choice, becomes an obligation. And in that obligation, your sovereignty begins to erode. This is the psychological trap Machiavelli would have seen through instantly. When you reveal everything, you give others the map to your vulnerabilities. You disarm yourself, believing you are being noble, when in truth, you are handing over the weapons that can be used against you. Power does not live in exposure. Power lives in the ability to choose what remains unseen. The modern cult of openness has convinced you that to be real, you must be completely known. But reality is far more complex. The self is not a performance for public consumption. The self is a realm to be guarded, cultivated, and revealed only with intention. When transparency becomes moralized, it stops being a tool and starts being a cage. You find yourself measuring your worth by how well you comply with this invisible demand to be endlessly visible, endlessly honest, endlessly exposed. And all the while, the inner sovereign, the part of you that should command, protect, decide, grows silent. Because sovereignty cannot exist where every border has been surrendered in the name of authenticity. Machiavelli's insight cuts through the noise. True strength is not in how much you reveal, but in what you choose to conceal. And so the path back to authority begins not with more openness, but with the courage to hold something sacred, something untouched by the gaze of others. Because only then do you begin to reclaim the power that moralized transparency has quietly stolen from you. There is a power far greater than the one built on words, gestures, or constant presence. The power that grows in the invisible empire of the one who withdraws. When you step back, when you resist the impulse to fill every silence, to explain every action, to be constantly seen, you begin to shape the space where respect takes root. Because the absence you create forces others to face themselves. They project their own hopes, their fears, their insecurities onto the figure you have allowed to become a mystery. And that mystery is the soil in which true authority grows. Machiavelli understood that dominance does not require noise. It requires distance. The ruler who is always speaking, always clarifying, always justifying, becomes familiar, and familiarity breeds indifference. But the silent ruler, the one who speaks only when it matters, who appears only when it counts, commands attention without needing to demand it. This is not manipulation. It is mastery of perception. It is understanding that the human mind cannot leave an empty space alone. It fills that space with stories, with longing, with fear, with admiration. And in doing so, it magnifies the absent figure beyond what mere words or deeds could ever achieve. You have been taught to believe that power must be visible to exist, but the truth is the opposite. The greatest power often begins where visibility ends. Think of the archetype of the silent leader, the one whose strength is felt more in their absence than in their presence. The one whose decisions echo longer because they do not speak lightly. Their withdrawal creates an empire of influence, built not on what they reveal, but on what they withhold. When you withdraw strategically, you invite others to confront the space you leave behind. And in that space, they build myths about you. They assign you strength, wisdom, even danger, qualities that constant presence would only diminish. Absence forces reflection. It commands respect, not because of what you do, but because of what your silence allows others to imagine. This is the invisible empire of the one who withdraws, a domain where power is not shouted, but felt in the tension of what is unsaid. It is a realm where respect is not begged for, but given freely by those who sense the weight of what they cannot easily reach. And it is in this empire that true dominance begins, where words end and the legend of the unseen begins to take form. There is a hidden price that few speak of, but many pay: the cost of constant presence. In a world that teaches you to always show up, to always be available, to always be seen, you are quietly led into a form of emotional bankruptcy. At first, this presence feels like strength. You believe that by being there for everyone, by responding to every demand, by never allowing yourself to step back, you are proving your worth. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to feel the weight of this endless visibility. The energy that once fueled your passions, your clarity, your sense of self begins to splinter under the burden of being everything to everyone. Emotional exhaustion creeps in, not as a sudden collapse, but as a gradual erosion. Each time you say yes when you wanted to say no, each time you show up out of obligation rather than choice, you chip away at your own foundation. You smile, you speak, you engage, but inside, a numbness grows. The constant need to be present fragments your attention, scatters your focus, and leaves you feeling hollow. You are no longer living with intention. You are performing a role that consumes you bit by bit. And as this exhaustion deepens, something even more dangerous happens. The boundary between your persona and your essence begins to dissolve. The face you show to the world, the one shaped by others' expectations, by the need to be liked, by the hunger for approval, starts to blur with who you truly are. You forget where the mask ends and where your true self begins. It is the slow death of sovereignty. The relentless need to be liked, to be accepted, to be seen, kills your ability to stand apart, to think clearly, to choose freely. You become a collection of reactions rather than a person with direction. The tragedy is that this process feels noble while it's happening. You tell yourself you're doing the right thing, being kind, being dependable, being strong. But beneath that story is a more painful truth. You have traded your identity for approval. You have handed over your inner authority in exchange for the fleeting comfort of being liked. And in doing so, you have allowed your constant presence to become a cage, one that drains your energy and dims your light. There is no lasting respect in this path, because those who are always present, always available, are eventually seen as ordinary. Their presence is expected, their energy consumed without thought, their identity forgotten beneath the weight of their own self-erasure. The cost of constant presence is not just exhaustion, it is invisibility, the paradox of being everywhere and nowhere at once. To reclaim yourself, you must first recognize this cost. You must see that stepping back is not abandonment, it is preservation. That disappearing at times is not weakness, it is an act of self-respect. Only when you dare to create space to guard your energy, to honor the boundary between persona and essence, can you begin to recover what constant presence has stolen from you, your clarity, your strength, your true identity. And in that recovery, you'll find that respect, real respect, was waiting for you in the silence all along. Silence has always been misunderstood. In a world addicted to noise, where worth seems measured by how loudly and how often you can speak, the idea that absence could be your greatest weapon feels almost heretical. But silence, true, intentional silence, is not emptiness. It is the sword of the unseen, the blade that cuts more deeply than words ever could. Absence, when chosen with purpose, becomes a ritual of death and rebirth. You let the old version of yourself, the one desperate to be heard, to be seen, to be validated, fade into the background. And in that fading, something stronger, clearer, untouchable begins to emerge. Machiavelli understood the terrifying power of withdrawal. To step back is to provoke, to unsettle, to awaken in others the realization of your value. When you speak, you give shape to your thoughts. When you act, you show your hand. But when you disappear, when you allow the space between you and the world to widen, you force others to confront the silence you leave behind. And in that silence, they begin to listen. In that space, they begin to remember. What they could dismiss when you were always present becomes haunting in your absence. This is not manipulation. This is the art of individuation, the process of claiming your inner authority, of no longer scattering your power in 1,000 directions in the hope that someone will recognize it. The one who masters absence does not run from the world, nor from connection. They simply refuse to waste their presence where it will not be valued. They choose their moments, they appear when it matters, and vanish when it does not. And in doing so, they become the silent ruler, the unseen warrior who wins battles not through confrontation, but through the unshakable strength of restraint. Absence carves respect because it teaches others what your presence truly meant. It draws a clear line between what is essential and what is noise. When you disappear, you stop explaining yourself. You stop defending your worth. You stop offering yourself on the altar of endless visibility. And in that stopping, in that pulling back, you become more than what you were when you tried to prove yourself. You become a figure others must reckon with, not because of what you said, but because of what you chose not to say. Not because of what you did, but because of what you refused to do. Think of the shadow warrior, silent, unseen, yet victorious. The one who steps onto the field only when the battle is already won in the minds of their opponents. This is the power of strategic disappearance. It is not passivity, it is the highest form of discipline. The courage to leave a space empty, knowing that in that emptiness, the truth of your strength will echo louder than any speech, any display, any performance. And so, absence becomes the sword that carves respect without a word. A tool not of manipulation, but of mastery. A declaration that you no longer need to shout to be heard, no longer need to be seen to be known. In a world addicted to noise, the one who dares to be silent will always command the deepest attention and the truest respect. Carl Jung once said that the one who integrates the shadow learns not just how to appear, but when to vanish. This is the mastery few ever achieve, the ability to move between presence and absence with purpose, to understand that true power does not live in constant visibility, but in the conscious choice of when to be seen and when to be missed. In a world that glorifies exposure, this kind of mastery feels almost subversive. But it is this delicate dance between light and shadow that sovereignty is truly found. The person who dares to withdraw, who no longer offers themselves endlessly to the gaze of others, begins to walk the path of the silent ruler. Nietzsche would call this the will to power that dares to abandon the herd, the strength to step away from the collective noise, from the desperate need to belong, and to carve a space where your presence becomes rare and therefore revered. Respect that is born from absence is not given lightly. It is earned through the courage to be misunderstood, to be unseen, to let others wrestle with the emptiness you leave behind. The one who vanishes strategically forces the world to face the truth of their own dependence, their own projections, their own longing. And so, the symbol of this journey becomes the empty throne, feared, honored, untouchable, not because of what it displays, but because of what it withholds. The empty throne is powerful precisely because no one knows when its ruler will return, or how. That uncertainty commands attention, commands respect, in a way that constant presence never could. In the silence of absence, the legend begins to form. And that legend, built not on noise, but on mystery, endures longer than any speech or act could hope to. This is the somber truth that Machiavelli, Jung, and Nietzsche each saw in their own way. In a world addicted to noise, only the silent are truly heard. The path to respect is not paved with endless exposure, but with the courage to step back, to let go of the need for constant validation, and to trust that in the quiet space you create, your true value will speak louder than any word. If this reflection resonates with you, if you feel the quiet strength that comes from understanding when to appear and when to disappear, I invite you to leave a comment below and share what part of this journey echoed most deeply for you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel and become part of a space where silence, sovereignty, and depth are valued above noise. Because here we honor not the loudest voice, but the one who dares to speak with presence and to disappear with purpose.